Good morning, everyone. Miss Carol here. Well, as you can tell, I'm obviously not on Faith Boulevard this morning. I am at my home, but we're still going to have a Bible lesson. It's just going to be a little bit different place to have it, okay? We can study the Bible anywhere, though, can't we? All right, so let's get started again, and let's think about what happened last week. We learned that the Israelites celebrated the Passover exactly 1 year after they had left Egypt, right? And the tabernacle was set up by then, and so they were able to celebrate that first Passover. And then in Leviticus 10, verses 1 through 3, we're going to read something a little sad, actually, but it says, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took the censers. Do you remember? Those were the gold objects that held the ashes, the coals, and they could put the incense in there. So they took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense. And they offered fire before the Lord that he did not say they could do, against his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and burned them up, and they died before the Lord. Moses then said to Aaron, This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, Among those who do not obey me, I will show myself holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored. And Aaron remained silent. Well, that's a sad way to begin, isn't it? So, what exactly did Nadab and Abihu do? Well, we're not exactly sure. We do know that the Bible gave them exact instructions on how they were to use that altar of incense, that the coals that were used for the altar had to be brought from the bronze altar where they sacrificed, and they had to be brought into the holy place. And we know that the incense that was burned had to be made just to God's design. I mean, he wanted just the exact amount of perfumes and spices put in it. And he said if anybody used that for their own personal use or for any other use, that they would die. And so something they did was against what God had said. And so this is what happened to them. Now, what this means now for Aaron is that instead of having 4 sons to help him serve as priest, now he only has 2. He has Eleazar and Ithamar left that can do that for him. And that's a lot of responsibilities, isn't it? But, I mean, that's what happened. And God is specific about how he wants things done. And they disrespected that, didn't they? All right, so now we're going to read Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. And that tells us that on the 20th day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year, the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle of the testimony. Now, that means they celebrated Passover on the 14th day of that month, and now it's the 20th day of that month, so that's 6 days later. 6 days after they celebrated that first Passover, the cloud lifts off the tabernacle. And what does that mean? That means they're to start moving, doesn't it? It means they are to start their journeys, because that's what God had said. But before that tabernacle could be moved, it was like any tent. It had to be taken down. If you've ever been camping, you know that you have to take down a tent and put it back up again, don't you, every time you change campsites. And that's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to take down all of the curtains and everything that holds the curtains together. They're going to have to take down everything that's inside the actual tent, the actual tabernacle. They're going to have to do all of that. And so there was a certain way God wanted that done. And he was very specific about how he wanted that done. So inside, remember, only Aaron and his sons could go inside the actual tabernacle, right? And remember the 4 furnishings that were inside that tabernacle. There was the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and the lampstand, right? And then inside, there was, of course, behind the veil, there was the Ark of the Covenant. And so God told them to take that veil that was between the holy place and the most holy place, and they were to unhook it from the top and drape it over the Ark of the Covenant. In other words, when they walked in, they did that so no one saw the actual Ark of the Covenant. It was so holy, they didn't see it. The curtain just draped over it, and over that they put the hides of the sea cow, which we said we weren't sure what that was, but maybe it was the manatee, and that was waterproof. That protected it from the weather. And over that they put a blue cloth. Now that was covered, so Aaron and his sons didn't even see it. It was just covered. They put the poles through it, and that meant with the poles through it that it would be able to be carried without anyone ever actually touching it, okay, which was very important. And so they went with the other objects the same way. With the lampstand, they covered it and covered it with the sea cow hide so that it was protected, and wrapped it in the blue cloth, and the altar of incense and the table of showbread. Then they went out and did the bronze altar in the courtyard and the basin the same way. And once Aaron and his sons had all of those things wrapped and taken care of, then they would be able to allow the Levites, who were in charge of taking care of those things and moving it, they could let them come in and do their job. So that would, the tribe that were, the Levites were in charge of carrying everything sacred in the tabernacle. But there were 3 different families, or we call them clans, in the tribe of Levites. Of course, Moses and Aaron and his sons were Levites. But the Levites had 3 families. The Kohathite family was the one God put in charge of carrying all the sacred objects of the tabernacle. So once those objects were covered and wrapped, it was their job to carry them. Another clan was called the Gershonites. And the Gershonites were in charge of all the curtains, all those curtains that surrounded the courtyard and the curtains that were inside the tabernacle itself. Those all had to be carried. And that was their job to do that. And the third clan there, the Merarite clan, was in charge of all the poles and the crossbars and everything that the curtains hung on, and that the tent was able to be assembled upon, and the tent pegs and all of that. That was their job, to carry all of that. And God had a specific way that he wanted the tribes to camp. If you remember, we talked a little bit about that, but there was a reason why he had them camping this way. Let me pull this back just a little bit. There we go. All right, over here we see that you can see the tabernacle, and you see the bronze altar there, and the basin, the actual tabernacle. This is the courtyard. All right, so camped immediately around the tabernacle, if you remember, were the Levites. They were protecting the tabernacle, but protecting it from the Israelites hurting themselves or being killed. If they even tried to go in there, they would be killed, right? So they were actually protecting the Israelites from themselves. So the Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons were camped directly in front of the entrance to the courtyard, and the entrance always faced east. All right, so it always faced east. That was where they camped. Above were the family of the Merarites, okay, the Merarites. Behind, which would have been west, were the Gershonites. And then here in the south were the Kohathites. So north Merarites, south Kohathites, west Gershonites, and over here were Aaron, Moses, and their sons. Okay, so then the tribes, the different tribes of Israel were camped after that. So we have in front here the tribe of Issachar, Judah, and Zebulun. They were camped right behind Moses and his family. And then over here we have, into the north, we have Naphtali, Asher, and Dan. They were camped up there. To the west, we have Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And to the south, we have Gad, Simeon, and Reuben and their families. Now remember, the Levites are actually camped around here. So that's one of the 12 sons of Jacob, right? And the one missing we talked about is Joseph. And he's really not missing. It's just that Israel, or his father Jacob, as his name was changed to Israel, he is the one that actually gave Joseph two blessings, right? A double inheritance. So Joseph's name isn't actually there, but his two sons are. So he gets two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. So now when they're getting ready to set out, they're going to do that from in the order in which they're camped. Plus, I will explain to you in a little bit about why God wanted them to be camped that way. All right, so before they could set out, though, even though they had everything together, we're going to read in Numbers 1, verse 51 through 53. Whenever the tabernacle is to move, the Levites are to take it down, and whenever the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall do it. Anyone else who goes near it shall be put to death. The Israelites are to set up their tents by divisions, each man in his own camp and under his own standard. Now, a standard is another word for a flag or a banner. And each tribe had their own banner. And I know you've probably seen when kings went out to war, they had, in medieval times even, they had banners. And it represented the king, it represented the knights' families, right? And so each tribe was like that. They each had their own banner because they set out in a kind of a army or military march when they left. I'm just showing you just a picture that I found of Judah, and it's a lion. And the only reason that I think this is really, really interesting is because when Jacob, or Israel, was giving his final blessing to his sons before he died, to each one of them, he gave them a blessing based on, he thought, what their character was like. So with Judah, he said he's like a lion. And so I found this interesting that whoever drew this put a lion on Judah's banner, which very well could have been the way it was, but we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. And you know that eventually Jesus will come from the tribe of Judah as well. So that is just interesting, isn't it? That the lion, and Jesus is called the Lion of Judah, isn't he? Sometimes. All right, so they would set out. That would look impressive, wouldn't it? That you would see that. Now, here's something else that even though the Levites were to set up the tents around the tabernacle of the testimony to keep the Israelite community from going where they shouldn't go, they are also responsible for the care of the tabernacle of the testimony. And they did all this just as Moses commanded. Now, they also were not even allowed, like I said, to see anything at all of the objects. They had to be covered up completely before they could even go in there. Or if they saw the holy things, they would die. So, and they couldn't touch the holy things either. All they could do was merely to carry them with poles. They could touch the poles, but not the holy things. Okay, so they had a really important job. Now, we're going to also read in Numbers 10. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, make 2 trumpets. You know, a trumpet, okay, out of hammered silver, and use them for calling the community together and for having the camps set out. When both are sounded, the whole community is to assemble before you at the entrance to the tent of meeting. If only one is sounded, the leaders, the heads of the clans of Israel, are to assemble before you. When a trumpet blast is sounded, the tribes camping on the east are to set out first. At the sound of a second blast, the camps on the south are to set out, and the blast will be the signal for setting out. To gather the assembly, blow the trumpets, but not with the same signal. The sons of Aaron the priest are to blow the trumpet, and this is to be a lasting law for you and the generations to come. When you go into battle in your own land against an enemy is suppressing you, sound a blast on the trumpets, and then you will be remembered by the Lord your God and rescued from your enemies. Also, at your times of rejoicing, your appointed feast, and your festivals, you are to sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and they will be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord your God. All right, so now we're going to talk about exactly how did they set out from here and what all happened. So, Judah was camped, remember, directly in front of the tabernacle behind the Moses and Aaron and his sons. And Judah would set out first. The reason is because the tribes of Judah and Issachar and Zebulun were the strongest. They had the most men of the age of the military. So they had more soldiers than anybody, more men that could fight. And so they were going to lead the way, okay? So we have here, first of all, though, God said, we have the Kohathites carrying the Ark of the Tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant. And so they would have set out first with God leading the way. And actually, the Bible tells us that that's where the cloud came out. They were following the cloud because they didn't know where to go, did they? So they're following that cloud. And that cloud is coming directly down where the ark is and up. Okay, so they're following the ark with the cloud. That God's presence is there in that cloud leading the way. Then we have Issachar, Judah, and Zebulun right behind them. And next would have come the Merarites and the Gershonites. Now remember their job, they were Levites, but remember their job was to carry the curtains, the tent poles, and everything. And the reason being, they were to have the tabernacle completely assembled with the curtains and everything before the rest of the tribes arrived. And that's important because when you think about it, they had a special way of camping, and it was all set up to go around the tabernacle. So it had to be set up first before they could even get there and set their tents up. And so then coming after them would have been the tribes of Reuben and Simeon and Gad. In between them would have been the Kohathites, the rest of the Kohathites, who were now carrying the altar of incense, the table of showbread, the lampstand, the altar, etc. Okay? And then you have Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, who were the tribes that had the least amount of soldiers in them, or men that could act as soldiers. So they carried up the rear. All right. So now the Levites are continuing forth, and I want to read Numbers 11, 1 through 3. And that says, 10, excuse me. So they set out from the mountain of the Lord and traveled for 3 days. The ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them during these 3 days to find a place to rest. The cloud of the Lord was over them by day when they set out from the camp. And then I want to read this verse to you, because this is what Moses said. Whenever the ark set out, Moses said, "Rise up, O Lord. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you." Whenever the ark came to rest, Moses said, "Return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." And this was what Moses said whenever they set out to go anywhere. All right. And if you remember too, that we had talked about that in Numbers chapter 9, whenever the cloud lifted from the tent, the Israelites set out. Whenever the cloud settled, the Israelites camped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command, they camped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they stayed in camp. When the cloud remained over the tabernacle a long time, the Israelites obeyed the Lord's order and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud was over the tabernacle only a few days, and then at his command they would set out. And sometimes the cloud stayed only from evening till the next morning, and when it lifted in the morning, they set out again. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle for 2 days or a month or a year, the Israelites would stay in camp. And at the Lord's command, when the cloud lifted, they left. They obeyed the Lord's order. All right. So they have finally set out from Sinai, right? And so we're going to learn what happens and whether or not we're going to learn how much they appreciate how the Lord's taking care of them through all of this. All right. We'll see you next week as we continue on. We'll see, do they make it to the promised land next week? I don't know. We'll find out. I love you. Be the best you can be this week. Okay? Bye-bye.